sexy on Secular Sexuality.
Hello and welcome to Secular Sexuality, the ACA show that needs to do a better job at teaching people to pay for their porn. A recent YouTube survey from y'all says that 85% of you aren't paying for porn. Why? I know you know how. Anytime Arden or Rudy or someone with an OnlyFans is on the show, I see y'all's Google searches. Come on now. Anyway, that's enough lecturing from me. I'm Christy Powell. My guest tonight is a nonprofit and a soft care dom. Welcome, Puck.
Hello, it's a pleasure to be here. This is wow. The last time I was on here, I didn't get to be on with you, so I feel great that now finally we're done walking past each other and we finally get to do a show together.
Yeah, for sure. It's like that thing when I have somebody come and check on my dog when I'm not home, and then I come home and he doesn't like mention anything about it or like bring up the fact that there was somebody else here, and I know I shouldn't be irrationally possessive and angry about that, but I am. That's how it felt seeing you be on the show and you and I not getting to do it together.
Oh, well, we're making up for lost time, so let's do this.
Okay, well, let's get right on it then, because tonight we're going to be learning about love and caretaking through role play. So call the show. We're here at 512-991-9242 or tiny.cc/callsex because the show is starting right now. All right, I'll go ahead and mention that we had a great conversation with Brett Turner about DDLG relationships back in October, where we covered a lot of the mechanics of these caregiver-type relationships. And I really encourage people to check that episode out. But I also know that there was a lot about that episode that felt pretty challenging to those unfamiliar with the topic or with some specific traumas. And while tonight we're going to be speaking a little bit more generally and getting more into basically the psychology or maybe the relationship dynamics of all of this, I can also appreciate that some folks may find some of this uncomfortable. So all that said, Puck, you and I started this conversation in a bar a couple of weeks ago. And tell us a little bit about what you want to talk about tonight.
We did, and I make this joke too when I'm on the nonprofits that I'm very good friends with a lot of them, and we have conversations going. So being on an episode of nonprofits is like just the world gets to sit in on the conversation also. And so I went down to Austin a few weeks ago and tried to meet up with as many people as possible. And I remember when it was me and Christy, and I said, has the show ever really discussed CGL relationships? And said that had done that once. But there is so much under the umbrella of CGL relationships. One episode could not possibly cover it all. There was so much left on the table. And would we be willing to do this show again? And I am, as was said earlier, I'm a soft care dom. So I've had some experience in these relationships. I've had relationships with littles, and it seems like a great place to keep the conversation going. Now, I was 2 beers in at the time. And today I've only had some orange soda. So we'll see if that courage keeps up. But it's a conversation worth having and continuing from the last time. And if people are uncomfortable, please call and talk to us about what makes you uncomfortable about it. We'll do our best to answer from our perspective.
Yeah, I mean, you and I were talking a little bit before the show about how, well, this could be confused with that, but it looks like this, but it's really something else. And how do we, and you and I were both noting the fact that, given the opportunity, like we can logic our way through this and draw out the syllogism, but it is a lot of information to kind of lay out on the air. And I know that a lot of it, at least at first blush, can feel a little bit uncomfortable. That's not to say that there's anything here that we're not proud to be discussing, but I do want to just acknowledge some of that discomfort as we kind of get into it. But there are lots of different definitions for CGL or caregiver relationships. But how would you describe what we're looking to talk about tonight?
Okay, so I'm going to try to speak in general terms because there's a lot of different types of relationships that fall into this umbrella. But think about a CGL relationship as a framework where one person is typically what you would think of as a caregiver, and another person is typically what you would think of as a dependent. Now, again, I'm speaking kind of broadly here, because when we talk about someone who is a caregiver, that is not necessarily the dominant in the relationship. There are dominant dependents as well. So I'm trying to include as much as possible in this umbrella. So just stating it broadly, it's a relationship with a caregiver and a dependent. And a typical term used for this dependent is a little. But even that's a little misleading, because little should never be mistaken for meaning physically small. Littles can be all different shapes and sizes in relation to the caregiver. It also doesn't, like I said, doesn't necessarily mean submissive. Just because someone is in the dependent role doesn't mean they can't be in a dominant role in the relationship also. But think of this, what marks a CGL relationship is that the usual dynamic is that one exhibits a large amount of care for the other, or that's what that relationship typifies.
Yeah, well, there are obviously a lot of accessories, costumes, and toys, and everything else that we've talked about previously that can come into play here. But ultimately, we're talking about a role play, and underneath that, like a power dynamic and a state of mind.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about that dynamic or the emotional expression that goes with that?
There is, I would say, to me, the biggest and most important part of a CGL relationship is the trust. Where you, as you pointed out, a lot of these are going to be relationships where if it was a real relationship, the power imbalance or the relationship framework would make it impossible to, for example, meaningfully consent. But since both people are able to talk about what they want and what their expectations are beforehand and what their limits are beforehand, now you have that meaningful consent. And if you want to speak specifically to CGL, a caregiver would typically be seen as providing things like security and safety or affection, and a little then would be loyal or be obedient or provide companionship. And those are, rough ideas of the kind of things and dynamics that can be in the play of this relationship.
Yeah, so if we were to tease that out a little bit with some examples, we are talking about somebody acting as somebody else's pet and getting like back scratches and getting, kind of spoken to in that sort of pet voice that we all have, that, we hope nobody else ever notices us using. But there's like that feeling that you have when you come home and your dog is super excited to see you, and you do make sort of a blabbering idiot of yourself, like, oh, come here, good boy, and, that kind of thing. That's largely what we are sort of recapturing or maybe exchanging between people here.
Yeah, and you bring up just how much more excited it is. Like, we have a dog here with us right now, and I promise you, when my wife comes home, she is much more excited to see the dog than she is to see me, and that's okay. I get it, but she greets the dog in a very excited way, and the dog is very happy to see her. And I've learned to kind of bring that up. My excitement level. It's like, I'm very happy to see you home too, princess. Hi.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a slightly different dynamic, and it's not so much expressed in the physical actions, but in allowing yourself to heighten that expression. So
yeah, well, so then what does this end up like looking like out in the real world? I mean, tell us about 24/7 versus in scene, or just other ways of approaching these dynamics.
Yeah, okay, so every CGL relationship is going to have a different dynamic between the two people, and one of those is going to be the 24/7, where a person is almost always in some sort of I don't want to use the dominant term, but yeah, the dominant role and the dependent role. There are some times, though, where it only happens in a certain part of your relationship, where you enter little space only for a certain amount of time. And there are even some relationships where the only reason they get together is because they have that CGL bond together and they can interact in that little space. I don't know of any off the top of my head, but I imagine that there are probably even sex workers who would specialize in being in one role or the other who could play that role for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we interviewed one a couple of times on this show. I believe, and I could be corrected by the all-powerful internet, but that's a service that Alice Little offers in particular.
Yeah. So every relationship is going to be different, and I've had ones where there was always some sort of ownership play going on, even if it wasn't overt. There were shall we say, little signals that we could give each other in public that made the relationship, at least between me and them, clear. And then there are some times when the relationship looks just like any other relationship, except for certain scenes where we're activating little space. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, then what forms does this take? You know, we've like kind of thrown out pet play. We've talked certainly before about DDLG in particular, but walk us through some of these things.
Well, it's such a broad question to ask because there's so many different ways people can play in little space. But
sure.
For example, one thing to do that pets love is to be groomed and pampered and then shown off. So one great way to do this would be to wash or clean or to brush hair or to style even, and then do a photo set and say, hey, look at these cute pictures that you took. Sometimes it takes on other space, like okay, you're allowed to play for a little while, but you have to do certain things. Let's say to show obedience, for example. If I ask you to stop, then you have to stop, and the kind of things that you would train a pet, for example, to be able to, for lack of a word, do tricks on behalf of your owner, and then have appropriate rewards for that particular session. And rewards can be different. Some rewards could be affection or longer playtime or treats. So there's a lot of different, it's so many, and it's so dependent on individual littles and individual DOMs that it's so hard to come up with a comprehensive list.
Yeah, no, I get that. And I would almost hate to put people just into genres, right? Because we all get to design our own relationships. We all, frankly, get to design our own kinks to a certain extent and have these things look the way that we want them to look. But I mean, broadly speaking, I know that we're looking at things like often a doctor-patient or teacher-student type dynamic would kind of fall into this category, or
it very easily could. I've never personally done any medical role play, but if you expand the definition of caregiver independent to someone who is, for example, in the care of someone who has limited faculties, can't move, for example, or is acting in that role. Or boss and employee is another possible framework for this kind of thing. Most of us don't think of a boss as someone who cares for us, and those of us who have had good managers will know what that's like to have that. Or even better, if you've never had that, it might be something that would be worth playing out, in a fantasy setting.
Mm-hmm. Well, then, if sexual play is just a way of working out our fears or our fantasies, what's the need that's being met through this type of play? I mean, frankly, what do people get out of it? What are people getting off on here?
Okay, I think for a lot of it, it's fun sometimes to take a situation and something that normally wouldn't be seen as something that you could have, and just try to logic out. It's like, like you and I were talking about logicking out, how would this relationship work? Like a boss employee relationship, clearly, there's power imbalances there, but it could be a fun situation to play out. And really what it comes down to, like, for me, is it's about like building that trust, where you are adding trust to a framework that typically does not have any. Or has a different imbalance there, and it can help you build trust in that relationship and grow it.
Mm-hmm.
And for being a little, goodness, if it isn't just sometimes just a lot of fun, where you can just, like, how many of us have heard someone, if we haven't said it ourselves, I just don't want to adult right now,
Yeah,
or in
sure.
extreme cases, I don't want a human right now, right?
Yeah.
To be able to leave those responsibilities over there and just engage in the world as if you didn't have to have those worries and those responsibilities. So I can see it as being very freeing.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it can be its own sort of like therapeutic experience to be able to just relax and let your hair down and not be responsible for adult things for a short spell.
Mhm.
But there's also something about just that homegrown live action role play of just getting to play pretend like this.
Yeah. And another thing about relationships like this specifically, since they're not that common, but there are definitely people who have these feelings and want to engage with them, is a sense of acceptance,
Mm,
where you can go and say, well, you know what? Sometimes I imagine myself to have a lot of cat-like qualities, right? Like even if it's as simple as I like to nap all day, or I like to play, or I like to dress up. And this is the kind of thing that they might receive a lot of judgment for, even just within their friend group. It's like,
mhm.
I'm sorry, you like to wear what? But to have that judgment-free space, where not only can they do whatever they want, but they also have someone else with them there, that is encouraging them and playing along with that role. That sense of acceptance and welcoming must feel fantastic.
Yeah, well, and we're going to continue to talk about little space and sort of that experience of being able to stop adulting or whatever here in just a bit. But without wanting to like put too narrow a definition on it,
Mhm.
I would love to just talk a little bit more about what the dominant or what the caretaker is taking out of this dynamic. That experience of just being able to shower somebody with love, I suppose.
It is a wonderful feeling, to be able to express care for someone. And what separates a CGL dom from a BDSM type dom, is the instead of exerting a dominance over someone, um, I think of it as showing a ridiculous amount of care for them.
Hmm.
Um, and so instead of doing things like restraints, instead of doing things like punishments, certainly sometimes they have their role in a CGL relationship, but ultimately it's about the care. It's about showering them with attention and affection, and in certain cases, giving in to what they really need, and in return, having someone that is loyal and someone who is trustworthy and someone who is accepting of you as a dom. It's a wonderful, beautiful feeling.
Yeah, I feel like this can look from the outside to be kind of strange or weird or confusing, and I acknowledge that. But I think I want to express that there's also something really freeing about kind of giving yourself over to it in that way. In you know, in our normal everyday lives, we often, of course, love our partners and want to express concern and care and affection, but there's something about the like going over the top and doing it in this like really frankly silly kind of way, and that playfulness I think gives us a chance to maybe say something at a volume or in a language that we haven't otherwise given ourselves permission to use.
There is, and the, in that's like I do a lot, and we do a lot for our partners certainly, but sometimes there are some things that would be cute. It's not even functional. It doesn't really do anything for the relationship, but just like braiding their hair, or brushing their hair, or just picking out an outfit, something that you wouldn't normally do in the relationship, but just adds that extra little possible layer of play in there.
Yeah, I mean, if this role play provides us with a new language or a way to express feelings, what is it that folks are saying to one another here?
I think it's another layer of acceptance, and that's what it is to me. It's saying I have these feelings, I like to express these feelings, and then have another person come in there and validate it. Where you can be, 35 years old and still like plushies and still like cartoons and still, for me personally, it's video games. I associate that with something that you do when you're younger. So and to be able to say I am this age, but I still enjoy this, and then to
Mhm.
have another person come in and say, not only do I validate that, I want to help you enjoy that as much as you possibly can. It's one layer of judgment that doesn't have to be there anymore.
Sure.
And when you enhance, and to me, the best kind of relationships like this are the ones that are longer lasting. Not just a scene, which I can engage in a scene with a little and kind of use generic tools or guess what it is, or as the scene progresses, kind of get a feel for what they want. But I think the best kinds of care relationships are where both people come out of it as better individuals also. And also have a better relationship for including this aspect in with it.
Yeah, well said. Well, I'd like to take a moment to remind folks that we are taking calls. We're here at 512-991-9242. If there is anything here that feels confusing, anything here that feels maybe a little bit off, or if this is you and you just want to have a chance to be seen, we would love to hear from you. So give us a call and we'll jump right back into it. From here, Puck, I guess I wanted to ask if all of that is sort of the dynamic and the like relationship and everything that goes into what's being expressed and communicated here. Talk to me about the headspace of it. Walk me through what like little space or puppy space or these different things actually means.
Okay. This is such a okay. I suppose, like, broad definition wise, little space is more the frame of mind. It's not like a physical location.
Sure.
It's when you are able to shut something off or turn something on in your brain that now says, all right, now is the time to engage in little play. And it's going to mean different things for different people. Like, some people will be, I'm so incredibly stressed out with all the stuff that's going on in my life, I just need to shut that off for a little while and not have to worry about anything other than little space. And then there's going to be some people who are the exact opposite. They're going to be like, I need to make sure everything is taken care of and everything is all arranged so that I can leave it alone for a couple of hours and know that everything's going to be fine when I get back. Now that all that is taken care of, now I can get into little space. But little space, oh wow, I said all that, and I don't think I ever really defined little space. And one reason is because I am naturally not a little, so I don't think of it in terms of when do I want to get into little space.
Sure.
But I would think of it as that place you can go and not have to worry about anything other than indulging those little desires that you had when life was a little simpler, or when you are truly acting as the way that you would want to act. And you didn't have to worry about the judgment of the world on you. You didn't have to worry about what are my friends going to think if they find out that this is what I like or this is what I'm into. And you can fully get yourself into that zone and fully and actors and actresses will talk about like really getting into their character to get into being a little, to get into being a pet or your more animalistic attributes. And getting into and getting out of little spaces is another thing entirely too, where there are some people who can like schedule it. They can say, okay, my little scene is going to be this weekend from 2 o'clock to 5 o'clock in the afternoon. That's the time that I have with my person. So I'm going to do my best to be in the right headspace then. Other relationships might have triggers, like if one person or another is going into little space, they have a way of signaling their partner and saying, I'm in little space. And different ways of doing this, for example, could be putting on a special piece of apparel, a collar or an outfit, or maybe even doing your hair in a particular way, or little signals like that you can send to someone to say, I am in little mode right now. This is the mood that I'm in, and kind of throw it to the other person. Say, okay, you're going to play back, or are you not in the mood also? So getting into and then out of little space would be getting out of little space would be about the same way also. It's like, okay, little space is done, so take off the collar or take down the hair, or if safe words are pretty big in the community also. If you say a specific word, it's like, okay, little space is done. We had the fun time in little space, and now we're grown-ups again. So
Yeah, no, I appreciate you pointing out the maybe psychological triggers. I
Mm.
mean, those are both forms of communication in a relationship, but they are also sort of signs or maybe anchors to move into something like a trance state. You know, you talked about actors and sort of like the getting into character type of headspace,
Hmm.
and I think it's worth pointing out to folks that hypnotic phenomena are pretty similar to this in a lot of ways, in the sense that we recognize that there is no, at least as far as we can tell, trance state. Whenever we examine people's brains or look at other aspects of their neurology while they're undergoing hypnosis, there's not a switch, there's no lever inside of your head that says you are or you aren't. But subjectively, we see over and over and over people reporting similar phenomena that we can then confirm in terms of heart rate, in terms of digestion, in terms of perspiration. I mean, all of these different kinds of things that let us know from the outside that people can experience a degree of focus. And I think that that's what it really comes down to here, is that safe space that a dom is creating or providing that allows you to focus on your role play, on this dynamic, on some of these emotions or feelings to a degree that feels kind of trance-like for a lot of people.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said too about how safe and secure one can feel in this relationship. Part of it is that acceptance, and part of it is to be able to act out in ways that you normally don't get to act out in vanilla and mundane relationships, where you can express a part of yourself that most people, if they found out in your real life, they might raise an eyebrow. But then you have that relationship with that one person who is that accepting of you. It must be incredibly freeing for both people involved in there.
Sure. Well, I don't want to spend too long here, but it feels too connected for us to walk past it entirely. Tell us what age regression is and how important that is to this conversation, or how unimportant it is.
Yeah, no, this is where we're going to really get it in the comments. Because one of the poster childs for CGL relationships, and people are going to notice, they're going to rewind back over the past half hour and realize that I've been avoiding the type of relationship that is the poster child of CGL relationships, which is DDLG, daddy dom / little girl. I don't know how this became the poster child for it,
Sure.
because it's first of all, there's so many other different types of relationships that if you do want to engage as a little, you don't have to be a little girl, and you don't have to have a daddy dom. There's so many different ways to express that, but I think it also sticks out in people's minds because it's possibly the one that seems the most, if this relationship were in real life, this is the one that would be the most disturbing. And then people get the idea that people want to be a dom in this because they want to dominate a little girl. It's a way of them playing out a fantasy that they can't, so they'll do the next best thing. This, and we'll talk about age regression and what it is. Age regression is when you are putting yourself in a position that you were previously, a mentality or a maturity level that is younger than what you actually are. Now, this means ridiculously vast different things.
Sure.
So you could think of it as, I want to regress back to the point where I had nothing to worry about but playing with my plushies. Right, that was the most fun thing ever, and I loved the idea of a caretaker, a provider who gave me the plushies, who maybe played along with me, or who set up a space where I could do that. It could mean that, or it could mean, you know what? I never went through that party phase in college where I could go to the parties on the weekends. I could go karaoke every weekend and nobody judged me for wanting to go out that much. I can't do that now at my age, but boy, wouldn't it be great? It could, since I didn't get to do that, wouldn't it be great if I could go back?
Recapture that moment a little bit.
It's completely legal age, but it's no less a regression, because it's taking what people would assume your maturity level is now and saying, no, you know what? I want to experience something that I didn't get to.
And I'm sure there are a lot of folks in the audience tonight that are like, All right, so I could role play that frat party in college that I didn't get invited to.
Yeah, or other things like one personal story that I have is that I knew a person who did not have the opportunity to go to her prom, her senior prom, and it was a wonderful experience then for her partner to set up everything as if it was prom night.
Mm.
Fancy outfits, really dressed up, fantastic dinner, went out dancing, and then got a hotel room afterwards. And again, most people are of the age of consent when they go to their proms. So this is not an age regression to childhood. This is not an age regression to prepubescence, but it is still a regression. And to be able to go back and try to relive some of this stuff, it's fun, frankly. So.
Yeah, no, that's lovely, and I know that we have poked around the edges of this and answered it in a couple of different ways. But I am curious if you have anything more to say about what makes this particular like mindset or headspace appealing, or what it even really feels like.
I think that in establishing the kind of trust that you would want to have in a normal relationship, one fun way to play around the edges of that is to see if they can be trusting in other more mundane senses, or if they can be trusted in play, they can be trusted in real life also. And so I think of all of this, all CGL play as the establishment and growing of trust. And as a dom, the way that I do that is by keeping my commitments and showing my care and showing my continued devotion with that. I never want to disappoint a little. And so to me, it's about like that it's about taking this small aspect and finding ways to make a better relationship for it, a better, bigger relationship for it.
Sure. Well, it's in the title. I gotta ask.
Okay.
Is this inherently sexual?
No. And no, with capital letters and underlined 3 times. And I can understand why it is, because a lot of role play between adults tends to go toward a sexual situation. And not saying that there aren't some age regression situations, like we talked about prom night, we talked about college frat parties that do have a sexual bent to it. But in itself, no, there is nothing inherently sexual about little time. And in fact, that is one of the cornerstones of little space. Since the little and the dom both have a say in what's going on in that little space, it can be an absolute boundary. Nothing sexual happens in this little space. I am a pet. I am a dependent. Nothing sexual happens here. And in fact, I know of at least one relationship where sex was actually the aftercare for little space. It's like, okay, we had little space, like, we engaged in that time. It's like, okay, we're grown-ups now, and now we're going to be grown-ups, and we're going to get to do what grown-ups do. No, this is not, and do not ever approach someone who is a little or a care dom assuming that their little space involves sexuality at all. Start out by assuming this is not sexual, and then see where another relationship can develop from that.
Yeah.
So I this is like the biggest thing that I want to push back on. When I found out we were doing this, I just wanted to push back against DDLG and against the idea that this is necessarily a sexual thing. Excuse me. I think it's about developing that trust. Just like BDSM relationships, not a lot of those are inherently sexual, where someone can be in a bondage situation or be in a masochistic situation, and it's not always about the sex. In fact, a lot of scenes happen where there's no sexual contact going on in there. So CGL,
I think that might be one aspect of maybe kink or like the sex community at large that would be the most surprising to general folks in the audience or people who haven't really navigated those spaces. When you go to a play party or go to a kink dungeon or these sorts of things, I'm not going to suggest that there is no sex. I'm not even going to say that there is no intercourse. But usually, or very, very often, maybe a surprising percentage of the time, I have found that there is really no penetrative sex, and that really everything is focused on maybe on pain or on different types of sensations. and it's not maybe as sexual or sexualized as people probably assume.
Yeah, and then when you put another things to that, like non-sexual touch, like cuddling or affectionate touch, where it's more about showing affection or showing trust, and allowing yourself to be touched in that way. Yeah, and know that there's this strict boundary in place. It's like, okay, this is what's happening. I'm getting my hair brushed, but you know what? It's going to stop here. And to know that you have that say in the relationship helps you feel like you can establish those boundaries outside of that scene also.
Yeah. Well, I don't mean to be cheesy about teeing
No.
you up like this, but you said you wanted to push back against the idea of DDLG being sort of the defining element of caregiver relationships, and you pointed out also that things don't always have to be sexualized. I got to ask, how is this different from acting out or role playing some sort of abuse fantasy?
I'm trying to think of the best way to describe this, just because there's so many subtle ways that I think you'd need to really get into where if somebody is looking at this from the outside, they could definitely look at this and say the reason they want to be a dom is because they want a nice soft target where this person is going to be compliant and this person is going to treat them however they want. They're going to get what they want out of it anyway. And there probably are going to be doms who, are still learning how to be proper doms, and who are learning that it's not about finding people to dominate, but about finding people who are willing to grow the relationship. So the people who get into these relationships to find a sub that they can consensually abuse, I like to call those not my dom. How do I want to push back on this? Like, what's the most concise way? I think it differs from an abuse fantasy in that the person who is in the dependent part of the relationship has just as much say as to what's going on as the person in the dom role. And in fact, there are a lot of service doms out there who are going to be like, okay, you tell me what you need from a dom and then I'm going to act it out for you. It's the opposite of abuse. It's taking whatever the little wants, even though it may have the appearance of like, some people would think it's completely ghastly to be led by a leash and collar. Some people might find that to be fun and reassuring. So to be able to take that position of submission and quite frankly a dangerous situation where someone can really get hurt, and to be able to put that trust in someone, that's what separates this from being, to me, an abuse fantasy, because there are clear established boundaries about what is going to be in this relationship. And since the person who is appearing to be abused has all the say in what they're experiencing, this then by definition becomes purely consensual.
Yeah, it is. I know we're kind of playing with language and it can feel like it's coming at you a little bit fast, but we are talking about role play. We are talking about stepping into a fantasy situation, and there are consensual non-consent fantasies, and we can talk about ravishment play, and we can talk about various forms of dom sub dynamics and all of this kind of thing, and there's room for that in this space. But there's also something more significant here that I feel like has been missed. So I really appreciate you taking the time to kind of walk us through some of this. With all that being said, we do have a handful of calls that are starting to stack up. So was there any final words before we take that first call, Puck?
I think there's so much to this that we're going to be leaving a lot on the table.
Sure.
So I wanted to at least open this up by saying that I'm available on Twitter, or you can email this show and it will get to me, and we'll be able to continue these conversations. If there's anything that we didn't touch on that you think we should have, absolutely let us know. And I'm going to be eyeing especially the comments in particular, because this can be a controversial and difficult topic, and I don't want to leave people alone in this, and I don't want to leave any, if I've not been able to adequately describe something, or if I described something completely wrong, or if I am in the wrong, I definitely want to know about it. I don't want this to be the end of the conversation. This should be the start of it.
Yeah, no, well said. And it's worth noting that it's still the first half of the episode. So you can give us a call and we can sort some of that shit out right now. And we would sure love to hear from you. But for now, we're going to talk to Piper in Georgia. Piper, what can we help you with tonight?
Hi. So I'm recovering from a religion Zoom meeting that they had this week. And the topic was on sexuality and religion that Dr. Delaway gave, and something about in the way that the church often infantilizes people and kind of like stunts their natural development and growth came up. And I was just and that really resonated with me, especially as an assigned female at birth person coming out of Christianity. And I was just wondering how that might affect the way that someone like me might approach CGL in a way that doesn't mimic the infantilizing that the church often puts upon women, and that doesn't continue to stunt my development.
Yeah, so I'm hearing that you have had some experiences, some traumatic experiences, for which I want to first start by saying I'm very sorry to hear. And you're wondering how to navigate this space without feeling triggered or without contributing to like re-traumatizing yourself by mimicking some of those bad experiences. Yeah?
Yeah, and just like continuing forward and like catching up in a sense of stages of development that I might have missed.
Sure. Well, I mean, there are definitely ways that these types of practices can be therapeutic. I want to be, kind of gentle in the way that I use that word, but it's not at all strange to think that the way that people interact with one another, the way that they play with one another can be really healing and transformative. And there are perhaps some opportunities here to explore some unfinished business. And that can look like a lot of different things to a lot of people. But Puck, if you don't mind, you were sharing a story with me before the show that I feel like could be useful here if you feel comfortable.
And so this is where my mind first goes as a CGL dom is there are. How do I want to start by saying, okay, sex is one of those weird things where they assume that until you reach a certain age, you have no interest in it, you know nothing about it, and you are barred from wanting to learn about it. And if you do, there's something seriously wrong with you. And then once you get past that moment, that exact moment, you're expected to be an expert. You're supposed to know everything that you're supposed to know. And if you don't know it at that point, there's something seriously wrong with you. Most of us will go through some sort of exploration, and sometimes we are lucky enough to have had that exploration and those experiences with people who were helpful with it rather than harmful with it. And one great way that CGL relationships can help you is if you have a dom who will gently take the lead as you are trying to figure out what you were developmentally need to catch up on, whether it's learning about yourself and what your interests are and what you like, or just bringing you into other sexual interests. The idea of a CGL dom then is someone who takes the reins and takes the lead, but only moves exactly at your pace, which is something that more people should have that kind of gradual walk. But if you didn't have that, a good CGL dom would be able to bring you in and figure out where you're at, where you want to go, and know how to bring the relationship there.
Yeah, so how does that resonate for you, Piper?
Yeah, I think what you said about like being expected to have absolutely zero relationship to sex or sexuality, and then all of a sudden being expected to know everything about it is definitely true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's an unfair expectation, and I'd be lying if I said the religion didn't place a lot of that on you. Where and I grew up in a religious upbringing where having sexual interests at all was bad.
Sure.
And then and then if you go too long without getting married and settling down and having a relationship, it's like, what's wrong with you? Why weren't you able to find someone? And then it's never the religious structure's fault for instilling those values. It's always something wrong with you. And boy, that's one of the things that, like, I wish that, and I'm glad that you said you'd called recovering from religion from this. I'm glad that there are people who are working on this aspect of religious, erasing the difficulties of religious upbringing. So if I may, Piper, and if you are comfortable answering this, what would you like? What are you looking for in as specific or broad as possible? What are you looking for someone to lead you through it? Like, if someone could regress with you back to the age where you're typically thinking about exploring this, how would you want it to be? What would you like that to be like? What would you like that to look like for you?
I'm not really sure. I've never actually had any type of like physical, sexual, romantic relationship, so I'm not really sure exactly what I would be looking for. And I think that's one thing that kind of makes me hesitant to look into it at all, is like being wary and scared that if something were to be an unsafe scenario, that I wouldn't be able to pick up on the signs.
Yeah. And that's something that you can establish with your caregiver. You can say, you know what, I want a completely sterile relationship with this caregiver, where I know this caregiver cares about me, but isn't trying to seek that kind of relationship with me. Someone who's more an instructor or a guide, rather than someone who's walking you through the relationship as if your relationship was with them. Someone who's saying, okay, well, these are different kinds of relationships that people have, and let's take some time to study and see if any of these resonate with you. These are monogamous relationships. These are poly relationships. These are casual relationships. These are strict monogamous, whatever. All the different types of relationship frameworks. If that's what you need, then certainly there's a good dom out there for you.
And I'll simply say that as you are navigating these spaces, or as you get potentially like around them and sort of rubberneck with curiosity, I'll say that with regards to maybe re-traumatizing yourself, or it maybe made it seem as if you were almost anxious about the possibility of like stunting your own growth through this kind of play. I guess I can't say categorically that that's not going to happen, but I would say that you are allowed to trust yourself, that this is not a medication that you might have a side effect to. This is just a experience that you can go through, perhaps enjoy, perhaps despise, or perhaps feel really neutral towards, and then walk away from. If it becomes a lifelong hobby or fascination, then so much the better. But there's no reason to expect that you would be harming yourselves in these ways as you explore carefully. And, if you do notice some particular trauma, maybe around religion, or maybe because of religion, around sexuality, or around certain periods in your life, then you want to be mindful of that and perhaps go slow. But you can also lean into your own intuition. And if there is something that you are excited about, something that you are maybe fascinated or fixated on, that's probably something that's worth exploring. And if you need to be with somebody who makes you feel safe, or working with a therapist or something along those lines in order to maintain that sense of safety, then that's not a bad idea for you to pursue. But I don't want to leave you with the impression that the things we're talking about are any more inherently dangerous than any other type of relationship or any other type of play between consenting adults.
Yeah. And it also might not be for you at all.
Sure.
Right? And there's no, like, when it comes to going through the discovery, you're going to run into some dead ends. You're going to be like, well, this seemed interesting at first, but then I got to this point. It's like, nope, this isn't going to work for me. So don't feel bad if you try something and it doesn't go anywhere and it doesn't resonate with you. It just means it's time to try something else. There's no one template of relationship or anything that fits everybody. And I think that's one of the the biggest things that you push back on when it comes to religion that tries to funnel you into one type of relationship and family structure. No, the kind of care that you need, the kind of relationship that you need is completely valid. And I hope that you can find the steps to finding that kind of relationship for you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I think that's a really important point about not putting so much pressure on one experience or anything like that, because I think that's something that I'm still trying to walk away from, is like the weight that that these religious structures often do put on sexual interactions.
So if you didn't have that, how freeing would that be for you if you didn't have those expectations where nobody expects you to have acquired a certain amount of knowledge or experience by this time, and you could just be you? And wherever you are on this particular journey is absolutely valid.
Thank you. That was really nice to hear.
Yeah, we certainly appreciate you giving us a call. Is there anything else that we might be able to highlight or point you towards tonight?
I think that's it. Thank you for taking my call. I really appreciated this conversation.
Hey,
Appreciate
I'm so
you.
glad
Thank
to hear
you,
it.
Piper.
Yeah. All right, you want to try to sneak in at least one more before we get back to the interview?
Yeah, sure. What do we got?
Cool. Let's talk to Nate if we can. Nate, what can we do for you, buddy? No, hello. All right, well, we are going to put Nate back into the queue. And try talking with Kirk in Iowa. Kirk, what can we do for you?
Hey, how you doing? This is my first time calling any kind of call show, so it's kind of nice to be able to pop my cherry, as it were.
Well, no worries. We'll be gentle. What can we do for you?
Excellent. So I was watching the Sunday shows, and I forget exactly which one it was, but you had a non-binary person, and they were talking about the non-binary offspring of their sister.
Mm-hmm.
And they use the term nibbling.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I also have a non-binary offspring of a sister-in-law. And when we found out, they came out in Thanksgiving. And when we found out about that, the very first thing I thought is like, okay, niece and nephew are very binary terms. And I didn't know what a non-binary term would be. And so, like I said, I did my own research, and unfortunately, one of my research areas went to Tumblr.
I don't know. There was for a long time a really, really great community for a lot of folks on Tumblr. It has certainly shifted and changed in a post-Fosta Sesta world. But I wouldn't necessarily knock it. But tell us what you found.
Well, so obviously, Google says the very first result is nibbling. It's a term that was coined somewhere in the 50s. It's supposed to be a combination of non-binary sibling, I believe is what it was.
I mean, I don't know the etymology. I always just kind of figured it was like sibling, but for your niece and nephew. But I hear it.
Yeah, and then that's kind of what I saw as well. But obviously with that one, there's other options in that Tumblr post. I personally liked Nafis, which was, I thought, a combination of nephew and niece.
Yeah, the portmanteau.
And it yeah. And I also thought it sounded a little less, shall we say, predatory than nibbling, especially when you're talking about somebody who In this case, they are 14 years old, and I was just like, I want to use that.
Yeah,
But
I mean,
I guess
if
one of
a
my
particular
questions-
term makes you uncomfortable, that's okay. That's all right. I'm sure that you can navigate or negotiate that in particular, and it's probably worth speaking to your sister-in-law's child, whatever term we're applying here, to see what they enjoy or what they would be comfortable with. But I would just say broadly within the wide culture, we can talk about whether the word aunt or aunt or however we want to say it is, makes one particular person uncomfortable or whatever else. But we also more or less have culturally agreed that that's the term that we utilize. And I'm not saying that nibbling is written in stone by any means. I mean, all of this culture feels really fluid and changing. But it does seem to be the one that we've more or less grappled onto. Puck, do you disagree at all?
No, and this is great because now I get to say something that I've always wanted to say, which is I am still learning when it comes to a whole bunch of this stuff. And I studied French through a lot of middle school and high school, and of course in French and other languages, every word has a gender attached to it. It's le or la. Now that says nothing at all about whether it's a masculine or feminine noun. It's just the way to describe it. And in contrast to that, you think of English as, oh, it's English. There's no gendered words in English. Yes, there are. And
Yeah.
there's a surprising amount of them, and I don't spend nearly as much time thinking about it because it doesn't affect me nearly as much as it does affect other people. Non-binary people, for example, are highly affected by this, and they're going to spend a lot more time thinking about this than I do. And I'm going to, out of kindness, just defer to whatever they say best resonates with them. And if they say, I like the term nibbling to describe this relationship, by gum, that is my nibbling. I don't have to understand it. I have to, even if I don't get it, the time to try to understand it is not when I am face to face with my nibbling and I say, you know what, I don't think I agree with what you're saying. Let's hash this out right now over Thanksgiving dinner. No, it's incumbent upon me to do that research to try to figure it out. And until then, to be as kind as possible to a person who probably had a great amount of difficulty in coming up with not just figuring out that aspect of themselves, but then feeling comfortable coming up to Uncle Puck and saying, I would like you to refer to me as your nibbling. The least I can do is be kind to them.
Sure.
So it's interesting that you went to French, and I actually do study a little bit of languages myself. And you're absolutely right as far as there's specifically male, specifically female, lay and la. In German, they also have the same thing, but they also have a third option. So you got der for masculine, die for feminine, and das for gender neutral. And I don't personally have a problem with nibbling. Yes, it does sound predatory. But what I mean by that is from outside. So if I am speaking with somebody and saying, hey, my nibbling is about to graduate high school and we're all excited for them and, It's kind of one of those things where, because even as I started out explaining, and I did that kind of intentionally because it is something that is hard to fully explain.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, oh yeah, they are the offspring of my da-da-da-da, and it's
I mean, I think I can cut in here and say that it's perhaps hard to explain because we don't have a lot of language for it and we don't have a lot of experience with it. I don't know that the concept itself, I have a sister, my sister has a child, that child is a boy, that child is a girl, that child is an NB. I don't know that it's any more complicated unless I just use the word NB as a noun right there and you were suddenly confused by that. If we get comfortable using words like NB, if we get comfortable using words like nibbling or whatever else, I do think that these things will start to fade away because I don't know that they are any more inherently challenging. But it does fall on us as the members of this culture coming in this specific moment, this particular day and age, to take up the fact that we've gotten really far behind on this. We have not done a good job of making space for our non-binary family members. And so we have a responsibility now at this particular moment in history to start to really address that. And yeah, it might be a little bit awkward. It might be a little bit challenging as we play around with words and figure out how to do that. But I think that you've got a good notion of the task ahead of you.
Yeah. And now you can be a fantastic ally here because now you can go to someone who your nibbling has never been in front of, and you use that term in front of like maybe a coworker or a neighbor or something, and you say, yeah, my nibbling just graduated from high school. And they say, what does that mean? Then you can say what it means. And that person, that's one less person that person has to defend themselves to. And you are now taking up that banner. And they say, well, wait, I don't understand. Then you can say, you know what? I don't fully understand it either, but this is what they prefer to be called, and this is what I'm going to call them. And the least we can do is offer that kindness. Now you just became an ally, even though you didn't have a full understanding.
Oh, I definitely want to be an ally. Both aunt and uncle over here want to be an ally, and it is great that their parents are also definitely being allies. Kind of wish their grandparents were, but that's a different story. But they still have allies, even though they're in an area where it is very much frowned upon, where it's definitely not open. And, I'm definitely going to try to be the cool uncle for them and make sure that, they always know there's an ally.
That's very kind of you.
Yeah, glad to hear it. I appreciate you kind of taking on that challenge and for giving us a call and sharing this with us.
Yeah, sorry it was a little off topic, but like I said, I heard it on the other shows, and I just kind of I had it fresh on my mind.
Yeah, no, not at all. Secular Sexuality is about making the world more comfortable for people, regardless of their sexual interests, regardless of their gender dynamics. This is what we are here to do, so I appreciate you joining that mission, and hope you have a great night.
All right, thank you.
Take care. All right. I'll tell you what.
Yeah.
Would you like to go and see if we can sneak in one more call before we start to wrap things up for the night?
Yeah. Okay. Sure. Let's do it.
Cool. I hear that we have Nate back on the line. Good. Let's see if we're working here. How's it going, Nate?
Round 2, fight.
Yeah. Hit us. What's on your mind tonight?
I'm sorry about earlier. My browser was waiting on permission. So, Christy, I fully consent to whatever punishments that you wish to dole out. Okay.
Yeah, we'll have to negotiate that later.
That's fine. That's fine. Do what you please. So, my husband and I of 10 years. We got an anniversary next month. Maybe it's 11 years. I better stop.
Yeah, I'd do the math real quick before you get too close. Yeah.
But we love daddy son role play. We love CNC. We do that shit all the time.
You're talking about consensual non-consent type role plays, yeah?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to lay that out for the audience a little bit.
Yes. So it's a rape fantasy. I heard you guys say earlier that it's kind of not common, but I don't know. Like, it seems to me like you guys were literally describing like 2/3 of the gay content on Pornhub. Like that is, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
Man.
No, I don't mean to suggest that it's not common to explore fantasies of abuse. And it is, it's a meaningful part of human sexuality. And we can get into the ins and outs, thank you, and like the why of that and be here all night in a lot of ways. But more just to say that it's not a requisite and it's not maybe central to the caregiver-little dynamic. Certainly abuse and caregiving, I want to say, can be kind of opposite sides of the same coin to a certain extent or from a particular light. And our sexuality is often about sort of playing through things by pushing them to the extreme, by pushing them and getting to see them from like different angles, or maybe play out as a fantasy something that would be a extreme version of what we experience or perhaps what we fear in real life.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I wanted to talk about was, like, as I'm listening to you guys talk, I can hear the religious fundies in the back of my head, claiming that this is all evil and will lead down the slippery slope and this, that, and the other thing. So, like, to steelman their position a little bit, I think the objection to kink is that it will lead to, in the case of daddy's son, it might lead to pedophilia. In the case of BDSM, it might lead to, domestic abuse. And I have yet to see any evidence at all that says that this is true, right? Like, you don't have people that are engaging in healthy role play in BDSM going out and murdering people. You don't have people in the furry community going out and, having trigger warning. But, you don't see them going out and having sex with animals. Like, it just does not compute. It doesn't transfer that way. And if anything, like, the opposite would be true, right? Like, if you were able to live out a fantasy in a healthy, normal way, it might discourage you from actually going out, right? Like, I don't think anybody that is into CNC has a higher likelihood of going out and raping people. That's not what this is about. And I think that that's the major objection that I hear from those who don't understand it. And I just wanted to hear what you two thought about that.
I can't think of anything you said that I strongly disagree with. I've been in a CGL pet owner relationship with a number of people, yet I have a 100% success rate of not having sex with actual animals. So, I understand why they have to present this slippery slope, but it stems completely from ignorance and out of a sense of wanting to instill that fear. It's like, don't even begin to look into it. How often have we heard that in church settings? It's like, you know what? If you kiss, if you even so much as kiss, you're going to be tempted to do more. So don't even bother with the kissing, right? That purity culture gets instilled in there so early.
Yeah, well, and I don't want to be cavalier in pointing this out, but it's worth noting that same this will lead to that. A bunch of steps are missing. This will all lead to people having sex with animals. That same rationale was applied to gay marriage for years and years in our culture. And so it's a flawed argument, to be sure.
It's a flawed argument.
I didn't mean to interrupt you there.
No, it's a flawed argument, but it's scary, and that's why it works, right? Like, you think all the way back to Music Man, it's like that's trouble, or starts with T, which rhymes with P, which stands for pool or whatever, where they draw all these weird connections. Like, if you even begin to deviate from this path that I have carefully laid out before you, the only possible outcome is going to be eternal torment. And it stops people from being able to meaningfully get some good education about what this actually is. So we're not even fighting against what it actually is. We're fighting against a stereotype of what other people who have no understanding of it, who have never engaged with it, who have never engaged with anybody in conversation who engages in it, and they're taking whatever they say as gospel truth. Sorry, I was just playing Jehovah's Advocate there. And the best way to figure this out is to actually talk to people who engage. Talk to someone who talk to people who are on both sides of consensual non-consent, and see what it does for them, and see what the difference is between someone who engages in CNC and someone who wants to engage with that but without the C part of the CNC. There's such a huge difference in there. I don't know that I can meaningfully convey that difference in one show, in one phone call, but goodness, I appreciate the opportunity to be able to, instead of having that assumption made for me. Kind of soapbox there for a second. Sorry, Christy.
Nah, I mean, that's what we are here to do on certain topics, and this is one of those, I think.
Mm-hmm. And that's one of the biggest pushbacks that I have with CGL relationships.
Sentence.
Sorry?
Go ahead, Puck.
No,
Go ahead,
the The one thing that I wish people understood about CGL relationships is that there are people who resonate with both sides of them. And there are people who resonate as being a little. There are people who resonate as being a caregiver. There's nothing wrong with either one. They find each other and they have good, meaningful relationships with it, but there's nothing wrong about it. And then you have people on the outside, like people who are religious or people who don't understand this and say, well, this just seems wrong. Well, talk to us. That's why we're here. Figure it out from us and from littles and from caregivers. What do we get out of it? Why do we like to do this? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. I can sum it up in one sentence, and that is that I treat my man like a queen outside of the bedroom so that I get the privilege of treating him like my bitch in the bedroom. And it's that simple.
If that's the relationship that y'all have agreed on, it's been working for all these years. Why end now?
We have a great time. Exactly.
All right. Well, I do.
Call, guys.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. I appreciate hearing from you.
Thank you.
All right. Well, if we can, I do want to try and sneak in just one more call before we kind of touch base on a few final thoughts and wrap up for the night. But in the meantime, let's talk to Carpe Diem in Colorado.
Oh, hello, guys. My first time calling Secular Sexuality.
Hello, welcome.
Hey, appreciate hearing from you. What was on your mind tonight?
So I just wanted to get some clarification. So first, would you describe this like, how the sexual orientation is something that you are? It's not a choice, right? Would you place this more of like a sexual preference, a kind of kink or a kind of behavior that you learn or something that you can explore, or more something that kind of happens to you and you just kind of discover that you have that preference and it is more like something that's, I'm trying to say, like nature versus nurture. I don't know exactly what the flavor of the question is, but I just want to know if the theme of today is more of a choice or not choice kind of into thing.
I have to say it's both. Puck, I'm curious what you would say, but your temperament and your identity are definitely pieces of all of this. I don't know that anybody could get into it, but I think that's also true about baseball and horror movies and like any other form of kink. So while yes, I do think that this is not something that absolutely anybody is going to perhaps get into. It really is, for me, or at least in my mind, a learned behavior, if we want to frame it that way. I mean, the types of things that you're looking for, the types of things that you're needing, those are going to be specific to you, and they're going to be caused by a million different factors. So I don't know that I'd be super comfortable saying that it's a choice or not a choice, more so than really any other human behavior. Puck, what do you think? Where am I wrong here?
No, I was going to punt to you anyway because I don't know how to draw the fine differentiations between a fetish and a kink and an interest and where exactly these boundaries are. Like,
and every time somebody does, somebody else comes and stands next to him and says, "Nah, you drew the line in the wrong spot." And they're squishy words, and that's okay with me.
Yeah, like for me, I can tell you that I did not start out with this. I have that kind of personality where I tend to step in and start to take charge a little bit anyway. But then it's learning how to temper that with my environment, like whether I'm the new guy at work, and even though I want to step in and take charge and start moving cups everywhere, no, my job is to maintain the kitchen the way they want to maintain the kitchen. So learning how to be a dom is the same way. It's like, yeah, I can see, it's like, I see the kind of relationship you want. I want to help you have that. And, I want to be the one that leads you in that. You might have that natural tendency to want to be on the lead side of that, but there's still a lot of learning that needs to happen in there. One does not become a good caregiver dom overnight. You're going to screw up just as much as a dom as little as any other kind of relationship. So I can kind of see where there's part of it that it's a natural tendency, like to want to lead or to want to go with the flow or whatever. But then there's still that learning aspect of it where you learn where your personality fits in with other relationships. And just because it fits in a certain place in one relationship doesn't mean that your next relationship, you're going to have that same role. So I don't know if that answers
Can I
the
try
question,
to
because
phrase
I
it
can't really say where a preference starts and a kink begins. I really don't know the answer.
Sure.
Can I try to phrase what I would like to call it and see if you guys agree with it? I would think it's like a kind of relationship dynamic that you are attracted to because of certain things that you either gone through or have about you, that because you're born with or you developed through all your experiences that make you attracted to that kind of thing. Would that be a fair description?
With a slight pushback that there are some relationship dynamics I find interesting only as I find out what they actually are. Like, like
Interesting.
what's the best way to describe this? Like, I don't think you have to have gone through a prior experience, like a long time ago in your development, for it to develop into a different kind of relationship. Like, one kind of relationship, I didn't even know this existed until about 5 years ago. It's called feederism, where you take very, very strong control over someone else's diet, whether it's like directly feeding them or measuring out their portions so that they're only allowed to eat. I never even heard of this. Now, the relationship doesn't resonate with me personally, but there are so many different kinds of relationship dynamics out there and so many different ways that two people interact. There's no possible way we could come up with all of it before someone gets to a certain developmental point. So I would have a slight pushback on the idea that it's something that happened in the past that leads me to want a certain kind of relationship, just because in my personal experience, I didn't even know these kind of relationships were possible. Then when it happened, when the situation was there, it's like, yeah, I can work with this.
Yeah, I might compare it in that way to
or something about. Sorry.
Yeah, I didn't mean to talk over you there. Sure. Well, I'll say that I find this question really, really fascinating, and it's somewhat similar to one that has nagged me for years about polyamory. Is polyamory a lifestyle choice? Is it a orientation? Is it, I mean, how do we describe it? And I have asked that question of practically every person who has been on this show who has any connection to that subject. I've certainly talked to folks like David Lay and Dedeker Winston and Dr. Ray and all of these people that are experts on polyamory. And every single one of them has given me a different answer. And I could honestly spend the rest of this night just going on and on about all of my thoughts on the subject. But I don't know that there really is an answer. And I think it might be because in some ways, it's something of a flawed question. I am so fascinated by the answers that it generates, and I really appreciate you raising it. But I also think that it starts from this assumption that human beings can be categorized. And I don't mean to be like careless or flippant about that.
No.
That, yeah, when people call and ask like, well, okay, if there's more than two genders, how many are there? I get a lot of pushback, and I'm not trying to be flippant about it, but I sincerely believe that there are something like 7.5 billion genders, because even if we can start to like broadly categorize people, they are still individuals and they each have a different expression of gender. And I think that ends up being true of our orientations, the way we recognize sexuality as being on a spectrum. And there's a bit of that mixed into all of this too. So is it a lifestyle choice? Is it something that you need? I've certainly talked to poly folks who say that they were born poly, they will always be poly, and they were miserable when they were trying to pretend otherwise. And I've heard from people who have said the exact opposite. I couldn't say what's right for anybody or what box we should necessarily put that in. But I would say that a lot of the like more nuanced mechanics of this kind of thing, getting away from like the caregiver-little dynamic and into the particular outfits or like the particular kink or the role play that we put on it, that stuff to me is window dressing. The dynamic underneath, that's something a little bit more primal, and I couldn't say exactly where it comes from.
So I just want to say, like, for Puck, that I also said I didn't say that it was necessarily something that happened to you. It could be also something that you just are like that way for natural reasons or whatever. But I love what you said, Christy, and I just want to say that also I have the same fascination with poly myself. So when you get an answer, please let us know on the show. And what you said, maybe there is no answer. But I also want to say, is there something, okay, so if it is something that I can learn, right? Is there something that I need to some things that I need to avoid for or watch out for, or something that is not obvious that I can do wrong if I'm trying to get into it and kind of make a full pass on you know what I'm saying?
I think these are really great questions. Yeah, no, I think these are great questions. And because we are getting close to the end of the show, if you don't mind, I'm going to actually go ahead and let you go just so that we can kind of wrap up as we talk about those exact ideas, because that's certainly what I wanted to do to wrap us up tonight, is to better understand how people might explore these things for themselves. So, Puck, if you're game, let's say good night to Carpe Diem, and thank you so much for calling.
It's good to hear from you, Carpe. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. So for those of you who are unaware, I work with another ACA show called Nonprofits, and we take very good notes well ahead of time, well ahead on the subject. Since it's not a call-in show, we have that luxury where we can spell out exactly what we want to talk about. Christy is fantastic at preparation, and it's wonderful that last caller just happened to be asking the questions that we wanted to close out this episode on. It's fantastic, and I'm very happy to talk about this. So.
Yeah, well, so walk us through it then. If somebody is watching at home and they are curious, or they maybe see a little bit of themselves, or maybe they don't want to be curious, but they know that they're a little fixated and just need to dip their toe in the water.
Yeah.
What's an easy introduction to these ideas?
Okay, so little space is one of the rare things that you can actually explore a good amount of this on your own. And one very quick question to ask is, if you had 15 minutes where you didn't have to worry about anything else or anyone else, what would you do? What would you do with that time? Would you, I don't know, read? Would you play with some toys that you haven't done in a while? Would you watch a cartoon? What would you do with that, given that? And then if you find yourself doing activities or wanting activities that would be typical of something that, younger people, something that, I'm 41, right? So if it's something a college age person would be into, or even younger, video games, whatever, then you start asking yourself, okay, well, if I had my druthers, how much time would I spend in this space? And then here's what turns it into a relationship. You can then ask, how would you want another person to engage in this space with you? And that's where the real kicker of the CGL relationship begins, where if you identify as little, fantastic. But what do you want from other people when they engage in this space? Do you want a peer that plays along with you? Do you want someone who facilitates the space? Do you want to kind of act up and be bratty and find someone to put you in your place? There's no one right answer to this, but this is the kind of thing that you can start to explore on your own before you even refer to any guides. Because one of the biggest dangers in referring to these guides is you should never take someone else's template for a CGL relationship and try to apply it to your own. It might be a fascinating, interesting place to start, but their relationship dynamic may not suit yours. And as we've been talking throughout this entire episode, the relationship that you have with one person may not be the kind of relationship you have with other people. Now, fortunately, there's a lot of starter guides out there, and I believe there's going to be a link in the description to the website for this episode, where there is a gallery of links to begin to explore this.
Yeah, and I'll go ahead and say you talked about exploring with yourself, and then asking the question of, would you want to bring somebody else into that? And I love that just stepwise process. But I might insert another step in there where you are bringing in fantasy role plays through like different forms of media. There are lots of forms of erotic and non-erotic videos and audio tapes that you can find really anywhere that adults are creating and providing content. So there is that sort of thing on YouTube, as well as a lot on Reddit. The quality and the nature of it and your comfort with it may vary, but it might be something to explore. If you're not necessarily ready to come to your girlfriend and say, oh, I have a little boy fetish, or I'm sorry, a like mommy dom little boy kink that you want to explore, that's very, very uncomfortable and challenging to perhaps present. If you are thinking that you want to treat your partner like an animal or these different things, I get that that can be really difficult to walk them through. And we had a great conversation a couple of weeks ago with Amberly Rothfield, where we talked a little bit about how to explore or how to unwrap some of those things. But as much as I wanted to throw that in there, Puck, I really like the way that you have framed that process.
Thank you. This has been a fascinating episode for me to be part of. So thank you very much, Christy, for allowing me to be on the show with you.
Sure. Well, I want to check in before we wrap up too far and to see if you had any maybe warnings or cautions for folks as they're jumping into all of this.
You're not going to get it right the first time out.
Sure. Yeah.
This is a lot of this type
Try
of relationship
everything
is about,
twice.
it's about testing boundaries, and it's about saying, and don't be afraid to say, okay, I wanted to try this, sure, but now I'm definitely sure that I don't want to do this ever again. That's not being flaky. That's not being wishy-washy. That's knowing yourself and knowing where those boundaries are. Don't expect, if you're exploring this space or if you're exploring this in a relationship or by yourself, you're not going to get it right the first time. It's going to be a process of discovering yourself and discovering your relationship. There's no requirement that what you feel now is what you have to stick with.
Mm-hmm. Any final words you want to leave the audience with tonight before we start to wrap up?
This has been an incredibly freeing episode for me, because I spend my first early months in the ACA just trying to like fit in and be, like someone who's, hey, I belong in this club too. But lately I've been able to be more free and be more expressive, and being on this show specifically is probably the most free space I've ever felt I've had doing shows here. So thank you very much for allowing me on here and allowing me to talk about a difficult subject.
Yeah, no, I definitely appreciate your handling of some, kind of complicated material. And I really want to encourage folks to check out your work with the nonprofits. But where else can people find you on the web? What should people be looking for?
You can find me on Twitter, what the puck, and then the number 0, because it looks like a hockey puck. I spend most of my online time on Twitch, so my Twitch handle is the same thing, what the puck and the number 0. I try to stream there every weekday.
Great. Well, take a moment before we wrap up to remind folks that they can hear all the different aspects or facets of the ACA, as well as all the projects that Puck and myself are involved with on the different shows by checking out tiny.cc/AEN podcasts. Just a different way to experience all the different shows that we have to offer. And then I always like to remind people about the Secular Sexuality Facebook fan groups. I know that I'm in there all the time and would love to interact, would love to hear how people react to this episode or what kind of questions still linger. This conversation doesn't need to end just because the show is over. We would love to hear more from you. And I'll say, if you are watching this live right now on Thursday night, the show kind of quite isn't over, because Puck, you and I are going to be jumping into the fan Discord. Folks can find that and check out that conversation at tiny.cc/ACA Discord. And after that, I just want to take a moment to thank all of the hardworking folks that helped to make this show possible. Everybody on the crew that makes Puck and I look so good. Thank you so much for all of your help tonight. Thank you for that sexy crew cam.
And I'm usually in that crew cam.
Right? I
crew.
appreciate you you moving to this side of the camera for us tonight. And it is worth really, really highlighting to everybody watching at home that, a small number of us do move in front of and back to and in front of the camera and everywhere else. But the reality is, the folks that you see making this show are really the tip of the iceberg. There are so many people that go into making it happen. And anything that I get to take credit for, I'm going to keep that credit. I'm not going to pass it too far along. But that's not to say that it's deserving. Beyond that, Puck, I appreciated you having the chance when I wasn't here, but I am really glad that we get to do this together and just take a moment to encourage everybody out in the audience who's interested to take some time and give themselves a big old orgasm. Or, better yet, to give somebody else one.